I'm Rocky Wyatt with XL Ministries, and I have the privilege today to be with Tom Pennington, who is the pastor teacher of Countryside Bible Church, as well as the voice of the Word Unleashed. We'll be talking about some questions related to eldership today. So, Pastor Tom, first, thank you for joining me today.
It's my joy. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. Excited about what the Lord's doing here at Countryside and
likewise with XL. It's been really exciting to see what the Lord's done with the ministry.
Well, the Lord's so gracious to all of us. So I have some questions that I want to ask you about eldership that I think sometimes have created some confusion in the church as far as how or why we do things. And the first one, as you know, there are many churches who have elders, but they have rotating elders. That is, they bring somebody on the elder board, and they might be on the elder board for 3 years, and then they have to actually go off the board. For some, they have to go off for a year, maybe more. For some, they could actually be voted right back on the board. What are your thoughts as it relates to such a model of eldership?
You know, I think we have to start, in my mind, and I know this is where you are as well, you have to start by saying, is this what the scriptures teach? You won't find this anywhere. So it's not that this is in any way prescribed by the scripture. So you do have to say that there is latitude for an individual church to make that decision. You know, just like with every moral decision, if it's not addressed chapter and verse in the Bible, it's an issue of conscience. In the case of a church and its decisions, it's an issue of conscience for the entire elder board to weigh in on and decide. So it's not that a church can't do this. The bigger question is it a good idea? And why is it a bad idea? And that's where I would be. I think, obviously, many churches have chosen to do it. But the question in my mind is why have they chosen to do it? And I think by and large, and you and I have talked about this, by and large, it's because they don't want to find themselves in the position with a rogue elder and one they have to go and address individually and deal with through a discipline process. They'd rather it just come up naturally, where at the end of that 3 years, if he's a problem, he just drops off and we don't have to deal with it. That's not first of all, it's not healthy for the church, but secondly, it's not even healthy for the guy. If there's significant problems in either his personality, his character, his ministry, those need to be addressed for his sake. And so it's kind of it can be, and I'm not saying this is true for every church that has the rotating model. There are obviously other reasons, but I think often it's because of that very practical consideration. The problem with that is, and you and I were just talking about this, not that many leaders are available in a given church. So you end up rotating off some of your best and most productive, most gifted elders, and you lose them potentially for a year or longer. Maybe they're off for a year and they're like, wow, this is nice. I don't have all that heavy responsibility and for maybe wrong decisions or for bad reasons, they make a wrong decision or maybe just their circumstances change and you've lost them as an elder. And so you end up losing some of the accumulated experience that an elder board gains, as well as the collective wisdom that they've gained working together through the years. And so you constantly have this turnover. I mean, think about it very practically. Imagine if your church staff did that. Every 3 years, we're going to change church staff. Well, unfortunately, it happens in some churches, but not intentionally. Right. That would be a nightmare. Well, it's really no less of a nightmare in many churches. And so I just think, it's well-intentioned in some regard, but you can determine whether a guy still meets the qualifications for an elder without having him rotate off or come up for a vote. You can have elder review. If there's a problem with an individual elder, that can be addressed by some of the other elders. All those issues can be addressed without a rotation system.
Yeah. It also seems like if you have a substantial process to make sure man is qualified and equip him for eldership, then you've invested well in his life. So you're not really waiting for him to get on the elder board to determine, is this going to work or is this not going to work?
Yeah,
You've invested well, so you can avoid many of those problems on the front end.
And in the end, if you do that up front, if you choose a man and you've vetted him well, you've prepared him, you've trained him, you've worked through the process, then you know he's qualified. And when does an elder get to stop being an elder, biblically?
Right.
There's no warrant for that. A man who's been called and gifted by God to serve as an elder, the only way that changes, if there are truly mitigating circumstances in his life that force him for a time to step away, the Lord takes him, or there's some disqualifying factor in his life. I mean, those are, biblically speaking, the only sort of caveats or exceptions to an elder is an elder, and always will be, unless there are one of those factors that come up.
Right. And the longer they're there, you benefit from the history that they have with the church, the long-term vision that they have for the church, the wisdom that they gain in years. Just seems like a lot of benefits to that long-term service.
I mean, do you see, I fully agree with that. And I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking of what are the other advantages? Do you see any other advantages to a rotating system than that sort of opportunity to check a guy and sort of reassess his qualification, or to get rid of a potential rogue elder?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've given that considerable thought. There are only two reasons that I can think of to do that, and one is if they're a problem, it's easy to get them off. The second one would be you have so many gifted men for eldership that you want to allow other men the opportunity, and it's like I've not seen that church yet.
Exactly. I'm still looking for that church.
Yeah.
Right.
So I do think it's good for churches to consider it, because I think a lot of times it's just historical. It's in their constitution, in their bylaws. This is the way they do it. They go through the difficulty of dealing with that year in and year out, and honestly, I think if guys would just think about that in more practical ways, they might consider changing their constitution or changing their bylaws in order to have a healthier situation in their church.
Well, I mean, you served here with me at Countryside for 17 years, and we don't have a rotating system, and we never had those kinds of issues that we needed to address. And if we did, you addressed them.
Right.
But instead, we had such rich fellowship because we had so much shared history, so much shared experience, and so much collective wisdom where we had worked through so many issues together. And we didn't lose that or a portion of that every 3 years.
Right. Yeah. It was such a huge blessing to the church. So another question, a little bit different take here. You have your elders, and obviously we want to be training men to become elders, bring new elders on. But when you bring a new man on the elder board, after they've been, make sure they're qualified, make sure they're trained, make sure they're theologically developed. So you've gone through a good process. Now it's time to bring that man onto your elder team, if you will. How do you help the elders that are already there to prepare for that, as well as the new guy coming on? Because let's face it, anytime you bring a new man on, it, in some sense, changes the dynamics of the elders. So I think a lot of guys, frankly, don't want to add guys for that very reason. But what do you do as you add guys to prepare both the elders that are already there as well as a new guy coming on to be ready to work together?
Well, you mentioned one of the keys, and that is that preparation that takes place beforehand. I think part of that, and we'll maybe talk about this again on another occasion, but I think part of that is looking beyond even 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 and looking at, does a man really fit the context of that elder board? Is he going to be able to work side by side as a real member of the team that's trying to move the church forward? So even those practical considerations. But I think in addition to that, and I know you participated in this for years with me here, but having that potential elder or that elder candidate begin to attend elder meetings even before he's pursuing the process, so he begins to see and experience what it's like to be an elder and to function as an elder. He sees it ahead of time, watches the elders interact with one another. So that's really helpful. I think just sort of looking over the shoulder of existing elders and watching that unfold. But I think once he's been through the entire process and now is going to be actually installed and functioning as an elder, I think there are some additional sort of preparation, maybe counsel that elders need to be given. As far as the existing elders, you mentioned that, I think just making clear that the Lord adds elders to the church, and we need to assess, we need to make sure they're biblically qualified, we need to make sure that they're going to be a good fit for the elder board in the ultimate sense. They're not going to be creating issues and problems, whether it's personality or otherwise. And I think once you do that, then you say, let's have another elder come alongside and shepherd them. Even in that preparation process, what we usually have is, if it's going to be a lay elder, there is another lay elder, one who's already a fully functioning lay elder, who comes alongside that elder candidate and helps prepare him. And part of that preparation is helping them understand how to function, how life on an elder board functions. And then on the backside, once they have been placed into that role, I think there's some additional training that can take place. And I think I've always seen that on the staff side, because that's kind of a unique thing when a man who's a staff elder becomes, let me say it differently. When a man who is on the pastoral staff becomes an elder, that's a unique situation. Now he's got to figure out how to function in two worlds, how to function serving as an elder with other elders, and then how does that, if at all, affect his daily responsibilities day in and day out as he serves as part of the structure of the leadership of the church. So that's, maybe come back, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think with a lay elder, just helping them understand some of those basic, as far as I'm concerned, bottom line principles of functioning as an elder, understanding that you're not there to get your way, you're not there to sell your view, you're there to contribute your wisdom to the overall discussion, with the goal of none of us selling our idea, but rather sharing the wisdom that God's granted each of us into that problem or that opportunity, and coming to a consensus based on that shared wisdom, a consensus of the wisest way forward. A lot of the problems can be resolved there, because a lot of elders don't understand that they're not there to push their way through. They're not there to sort of come with their idea and make everybody else embrace it. No, we're there. The whole principle of plurality is so that together our collective wisdom is greater than our individual wisdom. And so we're contributing to that discussion, coming to a consensus together of the best way forward. So helping them understand that, helping them understand the principle of mutual deference. You and I've talked a lot about that. The whole idea that the only equality on an elder board is when it's time for a vote. But there is no equality beyond that. People are always our superiors in age, experience, gifting, whatever it might be. And there has to be this spirit of mutual deference. I've talked about it often, but if we're talking about corporate real estate on, regarding our church and its properties, we're going to defer to the man who's been in corporate real estate his whole life. Doesn't mean we're going to mindlessly accept everything he says, but there's going to be this spirit of deference that says he probably knows more about this than I do. Right. Now, we can ask questions, we can make it past the smell test, we do all those things, but there's a spirit that says, I can't contribute at the same level on every discussion and be as wise on every issue as other men around this table. So just those basic concepts are so important.
Right. I even think, too, for the existing elders, because they do have the history and, they've met for countless hours. And I just think those men being mature we'll be patient with the new guy. Come on, because the new guy, he doesn't have all that history. He may bring up things that you've dealt with 16 times in the past, and I just think when you have godly men serving, there's a gentleness, a kindness, a humility that goes with, you know what, he's not been here.
Right.
And so those are questions we've dealt with, but we're just going to have to be patient and shepherd them through those things. That's part of growth and developing as a team, as a group of men that work together. And I've seen that work well here, but I think so much of it, like you say, it's shepherding that man for a long time before he comes on. And when you say sitting in and watching, it's not really participating with the elders. Right. He's just watching. He's just watching month after month after month. And those things have been so helpful to maintain a healthy group of elders here, which has been great.
And then as you and I have talked about, I think even now beginning more intentionally to try to inculcate some of those concepts about how an elder board functions as a man's coming on board so that he understands, for example, don't come in your first meeting and you've got major comments on every issue. As you said, there's some experience, there's some background that the other elders have, and you need to get up to speed. The same spirit you would have, I hope, if you were joining any sort of board of any kind. And so just helping guys to understand that. I don't think while the elders are godly men, they're wise men, I don't think that we can assume in today's world, because many of them are coming from churches with dysfunctional leadership or dysfunctional elder boards at some point in the past. And they're still learning what that looks like. And so I don't think we can assume that in helping them get up to speed.
Right.
I don't know if you want to talk about the staff side or not.
Yeah, that always creates an interesting dynamic. When you have a staff person who participates in an elder meeting as an elder, how does that relationship with their superior on staff affect their participation in elder meetings? So what are your thoughts there? Well,
I know you and I both have helped men who are on the pastoral staff who are becoming elders think this through. And so you could contribute to this as well. But I think we give essentially the same sort of instruction, and that is just helping them think about the larger principles in elder board. And Christ has delegated the authority for the leadership of a church, not to an elder or a small group of elders, but to the entire elder board. I don't have any authority to act individually that hasn't been delegated to me by Christ through the entire elder board. And so understanding that means that here's an elder who's also on the pastoral staff, who's a part of the staff day in and day out. So they have to understand that the entire elder board has determined what the structure on the staff side is going to look like. In our case, I am, as the pastor teacher, I'm over the entire staff. Under me is our senior associate pastor, Jonathan Anderson. He is over the entire staff under me. And then there are leaders beneath that who are over various aspects of ministries. And so understanding then that structure is something the entire elder board decided. And that if I'm an elder in that structure, I need to submit to that. So what I say when I have a staff guy who's just become an elder, I'll meet with them and say, look, I'm thrilled. I believe you're qualified to serve. I'm excited about your serving. Here are just a few practical things about how that works on the day-to-day staff side. And I'll remind them of what I just said. And I'll say, here's some practical considerations of that. First of all, when we're in an elder board meeting, you are perfectly free to speak your mind and share your thoughts. If they're contrary to mine, that's perfectly fine. You're an elder. You need to contribute your wisdom, and that will drive us all together to the best consensus of wisdom moving forward. So don't hold back. I want you to feel free to speak. If it's an area where you and I disagree, and you have the chance to warn me ahead of time, I just appreciate your letting me know that. I'm happy for you still to speak your mind. I just don't like being blindsided. So, and you probably wouldn't either. So just let me know. Come in my office and say, Tom, this issue's coming up tonight. I know you think this is the way it ought to go. Here's where I am. And I'll say, great. I appreciate you letting me know. You share your thoughts, and we'll see where the elder board goes. I mean, that's the beauty of plurality. Is I'm not the repository of wisdom. You're not. We together come to the best place. And so I ask him to do that. And then I remind him that in the day-to-day function, he still reports through the chain of command that the elders as a whole have established. So that doesn't change at all. So just helping him see that, okay, the elders have delegated their authority over this particular ministry that you're over to you. And that's still your responsibility under the structure that they've put in place for the staff to function. And so keeping those things in mind, that when you're sitting around the table, you're an elder, you have a vote just like I do, and it may be an issue where you have more wisdom than I do, in which case, speak up and don't ever feel like you can't disagree with me. On the other hand, don't feel like you have to contribute on every issue either.
Right.
So that balance, I think, is key. But just most guys, and I'd be curious in your perspective here, but in my experience, most guys whom I've given that basic discussion to have responded very well, and they understand that. It just helps to sort of vocalize it.
Right. I would even say that there's two sides to this in one respect. So on one hand, if you're in an elder meeting, topics are coming up randomly. Obviously, everybody participates in that conversation.
Yeah.
But when I was your senior associate, one of the things we would talk to the staff about, if you have things that you want to put on the agenda, I want to talk to you about them first. I want to know what those items are. And there's different reasons for that, right?
Right.
Some of them are, they bring that to me. It might be something that I can say, no, actually, that doesn't need to go to the elders. You can do that.
Right.
Or, yeah, that would be a good topic, but before you do that, you need to do more research because we don't want to waste the time of the elders. So there's a process. In other words, if you just have a bunch of people randomly putting things on your agenda, I don't think that's necessarily productive. Oftentimes there's a lot of work that can be done, or it can be resolved without bringing it to the whole group of elders.
Yeah.
And so I think you have that side on the staff side. The other side, obviously, if they're in a meeting, they're going to participate fully with the issues that just come up on the agenda.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think you're absolutely right. And I think it can function very well. I mean, I think it's functioned very well here. I don't think anybody feels repressed. I hope you didn't feel repressed when you served alongside of me. People can speak freely. We just ask them to remember that the Lord has delegated that authority, and the structure is what the entire elder board has put in place, and we all live within that.
Right.
I have certain sort of parameters on my function. Those have been established by the entire elder board, and I need to function within those, and that's true for every staff elder.
Right. That's great. Another question. So within the context of the elder group, they're going to be men with a variety of different personalities. Some are going to be that strong, put it out there, fully engage in conversations, but there's also going to be some very wise men who are more reserved, not as easy to engage in conversation. So when you have that diversity, men obviously who are all qualified, and yet just different personality makeups. How do you benefit from all of those men and keep that in a reasonable balance?
I think there are two sides to that. I think on the one hand, I think there are some men who are quiet and reserved who should speak up in the meeting, who don't speak up in the meeting, but they're tempted to leave the meeting upset about what was decided and to talk about that when they shouldn't, when they had a chance to say their piece in the meeting itself and explain their wisdom there. So I think that's one side of it. I don't think that happens too often. You get the right people, you're not going to have so much of that, but I think that does have to be addressed. That's wrong. It's wrong for for a man to be in an elder meeting, have a strong opinion, not say anything in the context where he should be saying it, and then leave disgruntled with the decision and potentially even sow division in the context of the church. Again, that hasn't been an issue as far as I know here at Countryside, but I know it's an issue. I've heard of it in other places. But I think the more common problem is you have a guy who is a man who is wise, who has a lot of insight, but he's just by nature more reserved. And you have other men who are leaders of a different kind. They're kind of that A-type personality. They're driven, outspoken. They don't really hold anything back. And so I think if you're not careful, the more outspoken ones can dominate the discussion, and you can lose some of the potential input that really could help in the discussion. So, and I know you've done the same thing. This is my own approach is if it's a discussion particularly that's in any way controversial, in any way, not contentious, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean. It's debated. There's a lot of disagreement about this among the elders. I want to hear from every elder. And so I want to do two things. One is I don't want to make my voice so loud that I basically silence other voices. I think if you're the main teaching pastor, you have to be so careful not to override the other men in the room, because you're the primary pastor teacher. You're the one that people respond to. Many, perhaps men on the elder board, if you've been there any time at all, many of the men on the elder board, they came to that church because of you and your ministry. And if you're not careful, you can unintentionally just push your own views and silence theirs. So I think it's really important for the main teaching pastor to make it clear that he wants to know what the other elders think and wants to include that in the discussion. And for me, that means very practically, if there's a controversial, debated issue, is I want to stop and say, look, we've heard from several of us who've spoken on this. I'd love to know what each of you men are thinking about this issue. And I'll just stop and we'll just go around the table and just one by one say, what do you think about this? This has been the discussion. Here's what's been thrown out on both sides of the issue. But where are you at this point? And it's amazing what some of those quieter, more reserved voices can contribute to that discussion. And in the end, their voice may have the greatest impact because something they say really drives the discussion in a different direction. Other times, it merely confirms. As you go around the room and each person has a chance to speak to the issue, it only confirms the sort of consensus that's already been arrived by the louder voices.
Yeah, and I think your leadership draws out the wisdom of your elders, but it's because you're not driving an agenda. And I worked with you for a long, long time, but I've also worked for a number of other pastors, and the board was there for their benefit, not them being there for the benefit of the church. And those are two very different scenarios. And the fact that you want to hear from those men, I think at the end of the day, makes the biggest difference, right? Because if ultimately as a pastor, you're there to drive your agenda, to accomplish your purposes, and those elders are there to accommodate that, that doesn't foster men sharing. And I think that's important for churches to hear, because I think it's misunderstood in a huge way in churches. And you have a strong personality pastor who's there, he's got his agenda. And so I respect you and I appreciate that perspective. And you told me that when you came here, and I was already on staff, and you said, Rock, I want you to participate. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to share what you believe God would have you to share. And that was very unique for me. And I think that's what encourages men to participate, is that you value their input. And I think that's so extremely important in the life of the church, because I think we've lost that perspective to a great degree in many churches. And I think it's been devastating in a lot of ways.
I know you know that I believe this. I mean, in the end, it really comes down to, do you believe in the wisdom of plurality or don't you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to push your own agenda, you might as well say, this whole idea that God set up a plurality is a waste of time. It would be easier if I could just run this thing myself and do what I want to do. Mm-hmm. You might as well say that, because that's the reality. And so for me, I'm so grateful that all of that weight and responsibility doesn't fall on me, because I don't have enough wisdom to make every decision right. Mm-hmm. I just don't, and neither does any other individual. That's the whole point of plurality, is we need each other. We need those different perspectives and insights that help us arrive at a position that's the wisest moving forward.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I appreciate your leadership and how you do that. Tom, I want to talk a little bit about deacons and elders, the relationship between deacon and elders, and also, we use the term board, and understand that's not a biblical term, but it is a way for us to reference the unique responsibility, because in our culture and according to the laws of our land, there's certain requirements that have to be met even in the context of a church. So when we talk elders, we talk elder board or elder leadership. Typically, part of that means that those men are going to meet once a month or twice a month, whatever it is, and part of their role is going to be managing the business of the church. Mm-hmm. Well, then you have deacons, and in some churches, what they would call a deacon board that also meets and makes decisions. I would like you to talk about, because when you came here, it was one direction, and then you were part of making a change that I thought was very helpful here at Countryside. And so explain what you see as the differences between the elders and deacons, and why you would have one function more as a board and the other not so much.
Yeah, well, I think, you walk that path with me as we walk through that, but I think it really comes back in my mind to, what are the roles really? Elders are clearly responsible to oversee the life of the church. They are teachers, but they are leaders. And they're leaders not just in their own specific ministry, but they're leaders of the entire church together. And so it makes perfect sense for them to meet together to work through decisions related to the oversight of the entire church, both its spiritual life as well as its administrative and logistical issues as well. When it comes to deacons serve in a different capacity. And I know you agree with this, but I think deacons are clearly an office. Philippians 1 is very clear that in a small church like the church in Philippi, there were the members of the church, and then there were these two offices, elders and deacons. And so the question is, what are deacons? What is their function? The word itself and sort of a prototype of deacons, I'm not sure it's the office of deacons, but a prototype in Acts 6. When you put that together with the qualifications laid out in 1 Timothy 3, it seems clear that deacons are not teachers. They're not expected to be that. But they do lead. They're leaders of ministry. They're not just those who serve in the church, because every Christian's been gifted to serve, right? Mm-hmm. And ought to be serving. Right. So it's an office, and so they're doing something related to serving. And the best way, I think, to understand that is that they are providing leadership for serving ministries. And so the question comes then, what is the benefit of having them meet as a board? What are they going to talk about? Because they're over their own specific ministries. They're not over the church or a large portion of the church together. Mm-hmm. That's a strange, honestly, it's a strange combination of sort of the single elder deacon board model, trying to marry that with a plurality of elders. Mm-hmm. And they don't marry very well, because in the end, what you have, and this is what we saw and what we see in other churches, is you have this duplication that takes place, because the elders are going to be making some decisions that aren't strictly spiritual.
Right.
They're going to be talking about things like budget. They're going to be talking about things having to do with the overarching plan for the facilities and so forth. And so if one group of men meets and makes one decision, and then the other group of men meets and makes another decision, it creates so much conflict, so much misunderstanding and confusion in the function of the life of the church. And there is no biblical warrant for the deacons meeting together to make decisions about the entire life of the church in any regard. There's no warrant for that. Instead, they're over specific ministries. And so the way it's structured here, and we changed this, when I first came, as you know, we had the elder board, we had a deacon board. We disbanded the meeting for the deacons where they met together to make decisions. And now the deacons report individually to specific elders pertaining to their specific ministry. And then at least a couple times a year, they interact with the elders as a whole to explain, where their ministries are and what's going on, sort of give a report. But they're not making decisions about areas outside of their specific ministry, because that creates, again, great confusion. And you get conflicting decisions made by these two groups.
Yeah, that's what I think. When you came and made that change, or as our leadership made that change, I thought, that brought such a sense of relief, because you did sense, intentionally or unintentionally, that there is a bit of conflict with who's making what decisions and what level of authority do they have to make those decisions. And additionally, men who are serving well as deacons, if they hadn't been recognized to be deacons, and we talked to them, some of them didn't want to become deacons if that meant that you're going to add to their role this responsibility to meet with a group of men to make all of these decisions that were completely outside the realm of their role that they were fulfilling well. And so for them, it's like, well, no, why would I want to do that? I'm doing what I love to do, and that would make my life far more complicated. And so it just seemed like it created such a better, clearly, a better relationship between the men who were serving well, had elders to connect with, elders who wanted to hear about their ministries, support their ministries. The dynamic was, in my opinion, so much more healthy. And I've lived in that world, and you've seen it and probably lived there as well, where you had deacons, they're responsible over the finance, the elders are responsible, and so the elders are saying, no, we don't want to do it. No, wait a minute, and you have those tensions, and we created that.
Yeah, confusion and conflict.
And it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you. I think once you make that shift and change, it creates so much of a spirit of calmness and unity that we now know how we relate to one another and we move forward.
Yeah.
I think even in our own church, obviously, if there are men who are used to meeting on a board as deacons, there might be some initially who hate not to have that opportunity, but not for most of them.
Right.
For most of them, they were thrilled not to have another meeting on top of the normal ministry they had, the leadership of a ministry that they were responsible for. And it created a working relationship between the elders and deacons where, you have a deacon over a ministry, and now he has the latitude to make many decisions related to that ministry.
Right.
He's the leader of that ministry. But if he has a question, if he has issues, challenges, whatever, he has a direct line to the elder board through the elder that he's reporting to. And so it just created a sort of synergy that was perfect for those who are leading and serving ministries and the elders who are leading the entire church.
Yeah, great. Thanks for taking time to talk about these different issues. Very helpful. Appreciate your partnership with XL Ministries. Appreciate your friendship. Excited about what the Lord's doing here. Southlake, Texas, Countryside Bible Church. It's a huge blessing.
Thanks, Rocky. Always a joy to talk about things that that matter to both of us.
Yeah.
The Lord bless you.
Thank you.